If you've been watching the news today and the last few days, you would have seen former UPA Minister P Chidambaram going to courts and shuttling between various investigating agencies. It's all remnants of the long-standing investigation into the 2G scam. But now there's new insight into this due to a new book by an insider. The book is called Spectrum Politics and it's penned by former UPA Law Minister Salman Khurshid. While in 180 pages, it goes into the nitty-gritties of the case, giving their side, the UPA side, to what Mr. Khurshid believes was not a criminal case, but miscommunication, mishandling by the government. The book also provides an insight into the workings of a government, events leading up to 2014, and how that impacts what may happen next year in 2019 elections, from potential allies to a makeover for the Congress party. Various insights of it all are some of the things that we get from this book, and we're going to try and get you some aspects of it in Reality Check today. But let me just introduce the author of the book, Salman Khurshid, former Law Minister. Thank you, sir, for being here. We also have Nalin Kohli, who's a Supreme Court advocate and, of course, a well-known spokesperson of the BJP. Thank you both for being here, for helping us understand the 2G story, which actually is continuing now, as we're seeing those pictures, of course, of P Chidambaram going in for questioning in CBI and also Enforcement Director. Because he's in the news, I want to start with that aspect of your book. And I want to just read out a portion that you write over there about him, where you say, in this particular place, where you say prosecution has miserably failed to prove any charge against any of the accused made in or choreographed charge sheet. That's what you say. That's what the court also said. But you say that Chidambaram stayed at arm's length. Attempts were made to embroil him in controversy. He only sought clarification on pricing. Luckily, courts gave short shrift to dragging Chidambaram's name. What's also interesting, I must tell the viewers, is that Mr. Khurshid writes in the book of a particular tension that was there for some period between P Chidambaram and the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister's office, which he helped to diffuse. In fact, he talks about a phone conversation that takes place when he was at P Chidambaram's house, which actually diffused the tension between him and Manmohan Singh. Tell us about that. We didn't know about this tension between the Cabinet Minister at that time and the Prime Minister, resulting out of the 2G case.
Well, not strictly between Cabinet Minister and the Prime Minister. There were difference of opinions, ostensibly, on tackling what seemed to be a major crisis, in which the media had a role, because every day the media was saying so-and-so is responsible, so-and-so is responsible. And the cloud of uncertainty then would obviously have meant that everybody with a sense of self-preservation would have wanted to protect themselves, which perhaps was our greatest weakness, that instead of doing it collectively, we were doing it in terms of individuals. And I think the issue critically was, one, whether what happened with first come, first serve was wrong, i.e. was there a so-called loss, the notional loss, and if at all other people other than the telecom minister was responsible for taking that decision. And I think there was so much ambiguity about this and so much uncertainty that I can imagine that any sensible person, any sensitive person would be concerned. And that's the tension that you're talking about. It was like under the surface, but it was there.
Like they weren't talking to each other in cabinet meetings?
No. See, obviously you have to talk to each other. But what I'm saying is that there were papers reporting that somebody felt uncertain, somebody felt let down, somebody felt betrayed, somebody felt concerned, etc. And these are things that you won't always face-to-face communicate to each other, because there are always reservations and there are all kinds of things that go into it. So somebody has to bell the cat and say, this is not true. Nobody feels this way about you. This is not what anyone thinks you have done. And whoever is putting this out in the public space is not a friend, must be an enemy. Now you need to do that.
So there were rumors going around that time about Mr. Chidambaram's role, which you helped to clarify to the Prime Minister.
I hope I played a little role in it, but obviously it gets clarified in many ways. I'm really glad that the courts finally clarified and made it clear that there was no question of anyone being complicit. It was a decision taken by the DOT, and a decision that was taken by the DOT was a perfectly good decision.
Okay, so let me just get Nalin Kohli's perspective into this particular issue, which is of P Chidambaram's role. Mr. Khurshid in this book, of course, says that, look, he's accused of giving clearances to the foreign investment, but that was something that was taken by the entire FIPP board, and this issue has been going on, Nalin Kohli, since 2010. The case has been on since 2010. What do you make of these new revelations about this tension between the then Prime Minister and Mr. P Chidambaram?
Well, I'll comment on both, about the 2G as well as this. With regard to this, is a confirmation that what we saw, the UPA government, and what was reported also, it was a coalition of interests. It really wasn't a government, and that's been the charge that was there against the UPA government, that the Prime Minister's office did not have that kind of authority, not being a comment on Dr. Manmohan Singh personally, but in terms of the authority being denuded by individual ministries and outside the government too, which has been our charge in terms of the Congress president. That is one part of the story. So if there were differences, it shouldn't come as a surprise, because there were multiple stories also beyond the 2G about coalition partners having a point of view that may not have been in consonance with what the government's view appeared to be.
Right.
So they had a point of view which was not the government's point of view. So therefore that kind of stresses may have existed, and Mr. Khurshid, if he's writing about it, he has his perspective and he's obviously giving his point of view on it. But that's okay, and he's entitled to. On the 2G, if we again look at it from a little bit from the legal perspective, let's first understand the difference of the NDA and the UPA first come first serve basis. In the NDA, yes, it was a first come first serve basis with no end line or end time to those in the queue.
Yes.
You join the queue, you will get it, but you will get it as and when you came in the queue. What happened under the UPA was that they closed the last. He who comes into the door, and then on a first come first serve basis, the door is shut.
Yeah.
And that is why you had people who had nothing to do with telecom.
Right, and that's what he explains
and
in the
that's
book.
the whole scam about.
That's what he writes in the book, of saying that, you know, it may have been an administrative or within the ministry officials, and citing the judgment as well. But I have
just one more comment on the cases.
Yeah.
Yes, of course, there is a judgment of the trial court which has gone ahead and exonerated the entire accused, Mr. Raja, others. That is under challenge both by the CBI and the ED. But what is interesting is, it's also a peculiar situation where no less than the Honorable Supreme Court junked 122 licenses, finding fault obviously in the process. So now, at least as an advocate, I find it a fascinating legal position that the trial court feels there is nothing wrong. The Supreme Court obviously felt that there was something wrong. Now it's under challenge, so the story is not over.
That's a perfect cue, Nalin Kohli, for the second point which we want to highlight. And the second point is about the judiciary. What does this book say about the judiciary? Now, there are some very interesting comments which I want to go into. Now, first, the revelation. The revelation in this book is that Supreme Court judgment by Justice G.S. Singhvi, when it came out, the night before it came out, in this book, Salman Khurshid, then Law Minister, writes he got a copy of the judgment. This is shocking. You got a copy of the judgment, the final judgment, there were differences, but there was a copy which was left at your door. Did you not pursue? Who left it? How did this judgment leak?
What could I have done? The best thing for me to do was, at the earliest, get through to the Chief Justice, and I did. Chief Justice was equally shocked and would be.
After the judgment came next day?
Yes, obviously, because the judgment came at 10:30. I was incidentally not in the city next day. But when I got back to Delhi, I think perhaps later in the day or next morning, I spoke to the Chief Justice, brought this to his notice, and I sent him the original copy that had been left at my door.
Who was the Chief Justice then?
The Chief Justice was Chief Justice Kapadia at that time. And I sent it to him, and he was obviously very, very shattered and very, 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 very upset, and said that he would do his utmost to get to the bottom. I understand. He, of course, in due course retired, and other Chief Justices came, etc. But I do understand that ultimately they did find that this had been leaked through an individual in the copying department. There is a department where the judgment copies are made, they are sealed, and then they are sent to court. So they found somebody internally who was responsible. For my particular interest, I believe that if something like this can happen in the Supreme Court, and it is obviously deplorable that something like this should happen, even to the conscience of the judges and the Chief Justice himself this was deplorable, then how much more can happen? How much interference can be, how much interference can be
Does this happen with all
attempted?
other judgments or not? And before I get Nalin Kolin to comment on this, I just want to read out another part that you mentioned regarding this judgment. And you say, well, you talk about your relationship with the judiciary, and that I think is where I want the BJP to comment as well. You say, far from the NDA government's indefinite procrastination of the Supreme Court Collegium's recommendations, I used to get the list cleared right away. I even had all arrangements, an arrangement with Chief Justice Kapadia that he would give me the names on a slip of paper before the official letter reached the Ministry of Law and Justice, and question answers with far-reaching implication. That's what you say over there. It's obviously a reference to Justice Joseph's his collegium's recommendation of his name not being implemented for long.
See, for me this is very important, because we were under fire from the Supreme Court. Obviously the 2G judgment was a judgment of great consequence to us. Yet that didn't allow us, and they certainly didn't persuade me to ruin our relationship with the judges. The judges on a very high pedestal. They are a very important part of our democracy. And therefore, to show deference to their wisdom is something that we honestly felt was necessary. I certainly felt was necessary. My Prime Minister supported me in this. And that's how we allowed appointments to be made. Because if the judges felt that somebody should be appointed, then that person should be appointed. Not the manner in which it's happening now, that you're throwing the ball back, then you're causing hesitations, you're trying to do things that will stall or take away the seniority.
So you're saying despite that judgment which really threw things into a tizzy for the UPA, you wanted to. Interesting. What would you say to that, Nalin Kohli?
About what? A judgment that was found at the copy was found at...
no, well, you know, that we just...
Because that really you can't hold it, and as he himself has said, you can't hold the judges responsible for
about the difference between how they dealt with the judiciary and how it looks like the NDA government deals with the collegium's recommendations.
Well, there is a difference. There is no doubt about it. But
there is a difference.
Yes, I'll point to the corner how the difference exists. And that difference exists in terms of under the UPA, or even if you look at the last 30 years in which the Congress has been in government for a significant period, the average number of appointments of judges across the courts was about 78, 79 per annum. And under the NDA, and I'm talking of Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji's government, and then Mr. Prasad as the Law Minister, Ravi Shankar Prasad, that's gone up to 114 or 118, that figure. So it's really increased the pace. That there is vacancy, of course there is vacancy. It's a collective vacancy of several years. These vacancies didn't happen in 2014 when the government came in. But the pace of filling them in is fast. If you look at the amount of budgets that have gone for expansion of court facilities, fast-track courts, is about 5,000 crores since 1992, of which about 50% has happened in the last 4 years.
Okay.
If you look at appointments in the Supreme Court, no less than the Honorable Supreme Court, the amount of appointments in the last 3 years are there. There is a vacancy at present, but that's not there. With regard to Justice Joseph's issue, and I've said this repeatedly on multiple shows, personally, I'm against the concept of sitting down and discussing about individual judges on shows. It does great disservice to them also.
Okay, fine, understood. Yeah.
It's not fair. I mean, after all, there is a
but we're
judge.
talking on a larger
So, no, I'm not saying about your show. I'm saying generally.
Yeah.
As a principle, because everyone who's a Chief Justice of a court or is a judge being considered, it's not correct. They are all they're dispensing justice. With regard to the issue here, which is there with the Honorable Supreme Court, the government under the Supreme Court judgments, after all, the collegium is the outcome of a judicial pronouncement. The collegium is not part of the constitution. With the first judge's case, second judge's case, etc., the collegium comes into being. It is that very collegium system and the judgments that form the collegium also put in place the power of the government to send back a name for reconsideration.
Right.
That power, so it's not as if the government is usurping power, it's the same. In that, this is not the first time that a reconsideration has happened.
Right.
A reconsideration has happened at the Supreme Court, at the High Court level, it happens regularly. Plus, the government had other points. They put it across the to the collegium.
Right.
The collegium has met twice. They have put out statements So that process is on. So I don't understand how is it a negative comment on the government for doing what the government is entitled to do as per the judgments that set up the collegium system.
The readers can decide on that. There are so many other aspects that I want to discuss before we run out of time. The Kejriwal factor. There's all talk before 2019 of new allies. Remember, everyone's talking about a united opposition against the BJP. Could Arvind Kejriwal's Aam Aadmi Party be that potential ally, especially because of the praise that he seems to have tweeted for Dr. Manmohan Singh? Well, here's what Salman, Khurshid, former Law Minister, says. He says, ironical how Chidambaram allowed Kejriwal to outsmart him. Kejriwal mastered the art of manipulating public perception, and he calls him a slippery and crafty interlocutor and the oracle who weeded the brush. You're not a fan, obviously. Yeah, you're not a fan.
There are some things on which we can agree, even implicitly. No, this is a serious comment on him. He's now Chief Minister. He succeeded, despite all our opposition and our problems with him. He succeeded, and he succeeded enormously. But he still has problems with us. He still has problems with the BJP. Now, each one of us have said he's your man. I've said he's your man, they've said that he's your man, etc.
B team,
the point is, remember what he did. He destroyed reputations. He even attacked...
And you talk about how the story against you, the charge against you.
Now, all I am saying is, now the same person has gone to court, from court to court, apologizing to several leaders, including Mr. Jaitley. Now, he's gone and apologized.
But Mr. Khurshid, if your party is wooing him now, it seems that they are informally approaching them. Well...
To tell you the truth, from what I gather about my party, I gather that the local unit, the Delhi unit, is extremely cautious, and in fact, they're worried. It may be that there is a larger vision of how we get people on board. I mean, today, if we see our former president visit the RSS, and some people query it, question it, but other people are saying, well, he's a
What do you feel about it?
For me, it's very clear. I've trusted him all my life, and I'm not going to stop trusting him now without having a chat with him, without asking him what is the purpose. Perhaps he has a very good, high purpose in it. But really, the last point on this is that should we not reflect upon the kind of politics we do when we are trying to grab power, so that many years later, or perhaps a year or two later, we have to reflect back and think that we've done some wrong. And then if it's in court, you go and apologize. But if it's in people's court, should you not apologize?
Well, we know who in the Congress completely opposes him now. Before I get Nalin Kohli in, there's one comment, and because he writes in the book also about the Congresses before the 2019, there's one comment he made recently which really hit the headlines, and then we'll get them to react to that. Let's play that out.
अच्छा आपका नहीं पॉलिटिकल क्वेश्चन है हमारे दामन पे खून के धब्बे हैं हम ये धब्बे दिखाएंगे कि तुम समझो कि ये धब्बे हम पर लगे हैं ये धब्बे तुम पे ना लगे तुम वार इन पे करोगे धब्बे तुम्हारे लगेंगे हमारे इतिहास से कुछ सीखो और समझो हमारे इतिहास से सीखो और समझो और इस अपना हशर ऐसा मत करो कि तुम 10 साल बाद अलीगढ़ यूनिवर्सिटी आओ और आप जैसा कोई सवाल पूछने वाला भी ना मिले.
So it's interesting, Mr. Khurshid makes that statement over there, but he also talks about the 2019 promises to be an election like never before. Congress will come equipped with a makeover under Rahul Gandhi. Nalin Kohli, it's interesting. Do you think, and we'll get him to speak on it later, but do you think there is a little bit of tension in the Congress party now with people like Rahul Gandhi, and this comment actually came in the middle of Karnataka elections, where Rahul Gandhi is temple hopping, looking for a, new, away from the secular, just a secular or wooing the minorities kind of image, and people like Salman, Khurshid, who are sticking to the past as well, who point out and say, we have blood on our hands. Is there a middle road between the two?
I don't know, and I wouldn't even comment, because what are the internal dynamics of the Congress? One wouldn't know about it, but certainly we would comment on the political outcomes, because that as a political party that's opposed to the Congress party, and we fight for that space. Naturally, we are entitled to have a point of view. And with regards to, Mr. Rahul Gandhi, if in times of need he feels the need to visit various places of worship and temples, particularly in Karnataka, that's his right. People do see it, or dividing the Lingayat issue. But But I think the larger question that comes is then forming a secular alliance, and that's in the news equally, with regard to the fight for portfolios, which is a very secular fight, is to be also noted by the public. So let's see what comes out of it. End of the day, people, our belief is that a lot of development, the discourse on development, though it loses in the mainstream media because other issues do come up. But I do think also that in the last decade and a half, and particularly from 14 from our government, we feel that there is a change in the discourse towards also development.
Right.
In some cases, a lot of it, in some cases, because people are demanding. And I think
and perhaps that is forcing the Congress to rethink. So finally, as a last question, Salman, Khurshid, are you the old guard which is now being changed in the Congress? How would you say?
No problem at all. I mean, if we are old guard or anybody is old guard and they have to give way to younger people, I have no problem. I think it's interesting to see young people, some extremely talented young people, come forward, and I wish them well. We'll be there to support them in every way possible. But lastly, let me just say this, that this whole issue about development, why are they running away from real issues in this country? There are enormous number of real issues in this country, and if the alliance comes together, it is not an alliance against a person alone, not against the Prime Minister or anyone. It is an alliance for an alternative that India needs today. Sadly for them, 5 years have convinced this country an alternative is required. Now that alternative is taking shape just as they in the past.
In Uttar Pradesh, do you see everyone fighting? Your state, do you see everyone fighting
I think
together
that's the toughest. That's the toughest call is Uttar Pradesh. Certainly BSP and Samajwadi
because
in the last
she wants
3
40
elections.
seats, right? Mayawati wants 40
But
seats.
they've come together in the last 3 by-elections. I don't know whether that will hold. I hope that it holds. But for me, my analysis that Uttar Pradesh, if it's to hold together, will require a substantial participation of the Congress. Minus Congress, the entire thing might just unravel.
How many seats should they fight?
I'm not venturing a guess on how many seats, but there should be enough seats for us to be visible.
But it's the toughest, you're saying.
But as I said, it's perhaps the toughest call for the entire country.
Okay, last minute to you, Nalan Kohli.
Well, just on this, and that's been actually our stand throughout. Of course, opposition parties have a right to discuss, even try to get together. But at the end of the day, what is going to be the fulcrum of that? Is it going to be Congress-led, Congress-supported, excluding the Congress? Because all the 3 models are in discussion all the time. What's going to be the agenda? It can't be. At least what we hear is it's only anti-Modi in that sense, or an anti-BJP.
Yeah.
So that can't be an ideology of an election. And then the third is there are real issues, because what are they? Who's going to be the leader? Because those are issues. When these things get, as for several decades they have been in discussion, as and when this discussion concludes and we see something real, then of course we'll have a structured comment to make.
Okay, so now
I'll just say one last word on that.
Yes, sure.
We learn from their mistakes. They've done this before, and we learn from their strengths. And perhaps we'll put together an alliance that is better than the ones that they have put together.
And
in
the
the
people
past.
will decide who the best one will win.
Absolutely, the people will.
So it's not just about 2G, it's actually the road to 2019, and both our guests, Salman, Khurshid and Nalan Kohli, have given us fodder to think about that, as there is lots for political reporters also, lots of juicy details there. Thanks a lot. That's it on the show. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.